Well, friends, in our last class, we have decided to discuss about degeneration. As a matter of fact, it is almost the first pathological condition in most of the events, and we have discussed up to the level that degeneration means when a cell or a group of cells, a tissue, is brought under exposure of certain sublethal injury, certain retrograde changes takes place. And these changes are termed as degeneration. But this is under conventional description, though some other term, that is the retrograde change, is also applicable to denote this particular condition. We have already discussed yesterday. A retrograde means subgradation. The level bring down from the normal, and it is caused by certain sublethal injury. Means the injury is grievous but not fatal. It can cause much harm but not destroy. If the tissue is brought under exposure of such type of injury, it produces the condition is known as degeneration. Here, the changes which takes place in this course may be on the functional level or maybe on the structural level, though it may be regarded as stages or depends upon the extent of the severity of the injurious agent. When the changes takes place on the functional level, that is represented as the biochemical change. Biochemical lesion means all those biochemical activities taking place inside the cell if it is disturbed. And when the effect reaches to the level that can destroy the structure, that is the fixed structure of the cell, like endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, and likewise all other structures. When this change is limited to a slight degree, the degenerative process may be said to be reversible. And if the extent of injurious agent is to the level that can destroy the cell or can cause harm to the level that cell have to die, where the change is said to be irreversible. And this irreversible change is further followed by death of the cell, which accounts as necrosis. This may be understood by taking a very common example in our day-to-day life. Suppose you have to burn a matchstick, and you see frequently on the top of the matchstick under certain places slight more phosphorus or the substance remains deposited and a slight flash passes like this. Suppose that flash comes across this portion, you will feel that the area started giving burning pain, slightly reddish. It feels that effusion is coming out. The area looks like the soft laden with the fatty substance and burning to the level that you are thinking that it must for blister. But after a few hours, you observe that it becomes all normal as it was prior. That means up to the level degenerative process sets in, but because the level strength of the injurious agent is almost mild, and that's why it fails to produce irreversible change. But if its extent is like grave, then you will find a vesicle appearing at the site. When the vesicle appears, it denotes the structural change. Now, the internal fixed structure of the cell has already been destroyed, and here it appears like water-filled vesicle. It is most common example for these two types. When biochemical level shows its presence in regard to the effect of that injurious agent, what happens? First, number one, when the cell is metabolic lights appears if the breakdown of the intimate relation between the metabolites and some cell constituents which render it invisible. It has already been described under physiology that digestion. What do you think about the digestion? What do you think about the digestion? It simply means that conversion of gross food substances into its simplest form, which takes place inside the GIT, and as a result the active principles of the diet, that is the proteinous substances or carbohydrates, fat, reaches to its end product formation as carbohydrate into glucose, protein into amino acid, fat into fatty acid. Till this level, the digestion is known as systemic digestion, but it is not the end of the digestive process. The ultimate role of digestion or main aim of digestion is to provide energy or becomes capable to form the tissue. Suppose glucose, when enters inside the GIT, it passes out from mostly jejunum and reaches to the mesenteric veins, and through which it is carried to the liver and the metabolic activity starts. Ultimately, it has to be settled or collected inside the cell, and when it enters inside the cell, as a result of certain intracellular enzymatic system, these substances are rendered invisible, and in this form it remains till it is not metabolized. Now, if As a result of this sublethal injury, the enzymatic system is disturbed. That metabolites which was invisible priorly becomes visible, such as, suppose you have to dissolve a spoonful of sugar into a glass of water. When you firstly pour the sugar into the water, you may see the water and sugar both. And when stir it, the sugar becomes dissolved into the water. Now sugar is not visible. Instead, sugar is present there, though in invisible form. Likewise, the substances which enters inside the cell, they are rendered invisible by the effect of enzymatic system. Now, if you put that water on a stove and allow it to be heated, you will find that certain crystal is forming on the side, on the surface. It is just an example of being invisible and being visible. These metabolites becomes visible as a result of certain unfavorable condition, as the unfavorable condition is heat of the stove. And as I told about the reversible and irreversible processes involved in the degeneration, we may clarify it with the help of this image. Here I have tried to show the different level. The first level shows the normal cell. When normal cell is subjected to certain sublethal injury, when it is subjected to this sublethal injury, what happens? The swelling of the endoplasmic reticulum and some mitochondria may take place, as well as loss of ribosome, cell stress response operates, and as a result, two main type of change here may be found. The first, if the stress of injury is least, the cell undergoes the process of recovery. When recovery starts, what happens? The cell recovery associated with the removal of the damaged component by autophagy. Autophagy, it is well known to be all right from the initial phase of the physiological study, or even lower classes, and it is renownedly known. If some person will ask by his teacher what is lysosome, most of the students give only answer that it is a suicidal bag. Though it is not the actual answer. Rather, this process is one of the characteristic in a specific condition. Otherwise, this lysosome is responsible for secretion of an enzyme, that is lysozyme, which governs or controls the entire enzymatic system inside the cell. Here, if certain part of the cell damages, it is being engulfed by these internal structure, and as a result, those substances are ward off and the cell again assumes its normal position. It means the cell which was normal initially under effect of injury, it shows the changes like these, and again a recovery takes place, our cell again becomes normal. This is one type of the change. But if the impact of injury is certain moderate or more, then the irreversible change may take place. And in course of the irreversible change, what happens? Early dead cell shows the loss of nucleus, no ribosome, swelling of the mitochondria, swelling of the endoplasmic reticulum, and further these undergoes fragmentation. All the inner membranous organelles are mainly involved, like endoplasmic reticulum or mitochondria. The nuclear membrane ruptures. Nucleus firstly becomes eccentric and afterward it regresses in size and ultimately destroyed when the cell dead. This condition is known as necrosis. This is the next part. It means the cell undergoes different type of changes during the degenerative process. Basically, it reaches to its normal level, or if the impact of injury becomes sufficient enough to cause the change, then two types of change noticed. Number one, which I have described, this ultimately terminate it into the death. But if the impact of injury is a little bit milder, which was called for priorly as the functional change, here functional change is represented by appearance of metabolites inside the cellular region, and these metabolites appears which were rendered invisible, as we described earlier, that when the end product of the active principle of food reaches to the cellular level and enters inside the cell, due to the enzymatic setup of the intracellular environment, these substances are rendered invisible, which becomes visible when adverse effect of the sublethal injury occurs in the cellular level. Thus, if on this basis we try to describe the degenerative process, degeneration is signified by presence of metabolites in a sick cell. It means cell is priorly sick and metabolite appears afterward. Now, we have to distinguish the similar condition which is also represented by presence of metabolites in cell, but cell is healthy in initial phase. This condition is known as infiltration, and the infiltration and degeneration must be required to be differentiated from one another. In course of differentiating between degeneration and infiltration, it has been noticed that under degeneration, the cell becomes sick first, and afterward metabolite appears inside the cell. This sickness of cell is subjected to ill effect of those sublethal injuries. While in infiltration, the cell is healthy to start with, and due to certain metabolic disorder, excessive metabolites appears inside the cell, which is normally not visible. Normally, when this metabolite enters inside the cell, as a result of certain intracellular enzymatic function, they are rendered invisible. But this metabolic disorder allows or produces the condition under which the metabolite shows its presence and remains visible. It means it can be understood by observing an example. Suppose your class has capacity of 50 students and you 50 students all are sitting on the bench. No any students appears standing anywhere. And in between the period, in meanwhile, suppose a bench damages, broken down. Certainly the students sit on that bench required to stand up, and then in the class they becomes visualized. It represents any abnormal condition, disease condition occurs inside the classroom which causes some student to become visualized. And on other instance, suppose your class is in full capacity and certain other students, due to whatsoever is the measure, enters inside the classroom. Now total seat is already occupied. They required to stand. It means here, because they entered inside the classroom out of the capacity of the class. Certainly this difference between degeneration and infiltration is obvious, that the cell is healthy and cell is diseased, and on this basis one can recognize the degeneration and infiltration. But afterward, due to unusual appearance of metabolite inside the cell, under infiltration, the cell also becomes sick. And now, in both conditions, either in degeneration or in infiltration, cells are sick and metabolites are appeared. Here, no one can differentiate at which course, which process starts with the degenerative process and which is the result of infiltration. So, in further classification and further study, there is no clear-cut conception in this regard, and when the pathologist started classifying it in different types, so many controversies appears. On the whole, dissolving all the controversies, it has been decided to differentiate them, to classify them on the basis of appearance of the metabolites. Which particular type of metabolite is present, the classification will be given the name of that particular group. And on this basis, it has been decided to classify it as the protein metabolism. The protein degeneration. It means under degenerative process, the proteinous substances are in the main site target, and the metabolites appears from those sites. While under certain other degenerative process, the fat is in the target, anywhere carbohydrate, or at some places glycoprotein, and they are termed accordingly. Now, we shall undertake one by one to protect every condition, and when we undertake